Welcome to Carbon Conversations, a podcast by Biochar Life, where we explore the cutting edge of environmental solutions, from biochar to smart agriculture to the climate tech revolution. We sit down with experts and business leaders at the forefront of change. This is your host, Matt Rickard. Hey Laura, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me here.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's something a bit different, maybe not certainly completely within the realms of what we talk about on here, but I don't think I've had anyone from the, and how shall I categorize, I suppose from the kind of built environment, manufacturing, talking about that whole area, and obviously Australia as well, which is where you do your work. So it's interesting for me. I've done some work in that space over a decade ago now, so casting my mind back. But looking forward to it. Maybe the best starting point for the audience, just to give us a little bit of background about yourself, your role at CSR Limited, how you came to lead sustainability in this space, and you're looking at building materials, manufacturing, embodied carbon. These are the kind of things we'll be talking about over the next 30 minutes or so. But yeah, maybe a bit of an intro from yourself for the audience would be great. Yeah,
of course. So I've been working in sustainability roles now for a better part of 16 years. Both on, the corporate side for companies and also as a consultant. But where I've been sort of probably in the last 7 years is kind of across senior leadership roles, mainly in the manufacturing and property space. So working in the Australian context, but for global companies. So still across that global supply chain, and dealing with the same kind of issues, funnily enough, for those two industries, right? Because from a manufacturing point of view, I work for a building products manufacturer, so that we make the stuff that goes into the buildings that I used to manage. Have a lot of interest in this space. Very pragmatic, kind of risk-averse companies that I've worked for, so have that kind of input into how decision-making is done, not only at the senior, but the executive and board level. So happy to kind of give as many insights as I can. Obviously, anything that's commercial confidence I wouldn't talk about, but I don't think there's anything here that we can't discuss, but looking forward to the conversation.
Cool. Yeah. And I think, certainly not. It'll be more, I think, general stuff and maybe a good starting point just to talk about decarbonisation within manufacturing. I mean, I know it's seen as probably one of the hardest sectors to decarbonise, and from your perspective, what does the decarbonisation journey look like for manufacturers in Australia? I think interesting for us to talk about Australia because it's rare that I'm having people on from Australia actually. But what does that journey look like? How difficult is it?
Look, it's a really big challenge. We're probably one of the largest gas consumers for one of our manufacturing plants in New South Wales. And we also manufacture bricks, so a lot of our products are very gas intensive, and it's there's no alternative, right? It's a very hard to abate fuel as well. I think the other challenge that other manufacturers have in Australia, similar to ours, is that they deal with aged assets. So the amount of kind of retrofitting, the amount of kind of capital investment that needs to go into these businesses to improve efficiencies is another challenge. So how do you keep yourself a marketable business, as well as facing that challenge of managing energy price increases, commercial business, being able to make the profit that you need, as well as being able to reduce and create energy efficiencies. It's challenging the market that we operate in. So that side of it is quite hard, and even from any manufacturer as well, there's obviously the challenge around electrification too. So whilst it's a lever that we can pull, it's a challenging one too, because if you operate like similar to our business does, so we direct purchase energy from the national energy market in Australia, what that means is it gives us flexibility around those pricing kind of swift changes or the steep increases that we're seeing for gas and electricity prices in Australia. So it helps us to manage that a little bit better from a a cost perspective and saves us anywhere upwards of 30%, right, on our gas price or our electricity price. It also gives us a better way to manage the market and to manage our bottom line around those costs. But it then creates a flip challenge when you want to try and purchase renewables, because renewable purchasing, particularly PPAs in Australia, are a fixed price agreement. And when you are purchasing from a flexible market, as a direct energy purchasing, there's a commercial challenge when it comes to auditing from financial auditing point of view. A PPA is viewed as a virtual PPA, which means it's a market.
Sorry, just for the audience, PPA, just to
clarify the acronym. A purchase power agreement. Cool, so thanks. Purchasing of renewables is known as a PPA. But when you are direct purchasing and you are kind of energy hedging from the market, any other kind of agreement that you do around power becomes a very challenging auditable marketing tool for you as a business. So for us, it presents a lot of challenges. It almost makes it kind of impossible for us to get a PPA. We'd have to go back to fixed purchase pricing through a retailer, which means then we'd no longer have that flexibility of control around pricing, but we would be able to get renewables. So these are the kind of commercial challenges that businesses like ours, particularly in the manufacturing space, have to face. So your tool is or your lever that you have is to electrify. But when you do that, it comes with all of those additional challenges as a business, and how you manage those from a price perspective, so from a cost, as well as from a risk appetite as well for your business.
And what from the, looking at this through the point of view of the CFO of the business, I mean, there are certain elements to this that are a necessity. There are other, pieces to it probably that are, nice to do now, nice to do later. What is the economic reality? I know that's a very wide question, but is the presentation, hey, this is a cost save in the long term, and it's a, it's a higher bill now, or what are the economic realities of shifting to a more decarbonized scenario?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely, a company has to be willing, particularly a manufacturer these days, to stay commercially marketable as a business, but also to meet the sustainability pressures that come down our supply chain. So we obviously have large customer base in the property field, and they are rapidly decarbonising very fast. When you look at the energy that's consumed in a building, like any building that you're in today or I'm in, it's mainly electricity, right, that's powering that building. And so in the Australian market, for a company that has mainly their emissions base from electricity, it's a lot easier then to decarbonise, because you're purely just replacing that energy with a renewable source. You may be paying a fixed agreement for that will keep you at that level playing field of cost. So then the next line is really around that embodied carbon piece. And that's where it really becomes challenging from a cost point, and how you sell that to not only your executives, but how you explain that from a commercial advantage as well. Because it's quite challenging for a business to go, okay, well, yes, we can continue to sell our product, but if you're having a pressure point that continues to get larger from your major customer base, saying we want to know how much kind of operational kind of electric or energy benefit goes into, or what's the carbon content of the product that you're making, that's when it becomes kind of more of a risk point for your financial executive. They want to then understand, well, what's that going to mean from a market perspective? How much capital will we have to put in as a business? And what are the different levers that we could potentially be pulling to ensure that we're doing that in a way that makes pragmatic business sense, but also continues to push us into that marketable space as well. And there's a number of ways a company can do that. They can either put out their kind of sustainability report that tells you how many emissions that you have, that is part of your products that you make themselves. There's also a thing called an environmental product declaration. So you may have heard of an EPD, is what they're referred to in the market. so you can certify for that. The thing is, all of these certifications not only come with a cost to certify, but they also come with a cost to operationalize your business to meet that certification. So there's a certain number of kind of offsets that you have to pick as a business. And it's about how you forecast that in a roadmap to demonstrate, well, yes, we're going to be outlaying an additional 20% potentially of like our cost, but the return benefit of that means that as a company we are decarbonising at a rate that suits our targets, but we're also then meeting the expectation of our customers and being able to provide them with that level of confidence that we are doing everything we can to reduce our energy and our emissions. But it's a tough balance, right, from a pragmatic financial business.
Yeah, for sure. You just got me thinking that. I mean, I was just going to ask about government. I mean, before I do, it's been 15 years, I think, since I lived in Australia. Maybe it's longer, actually. I was there for a year on a project with a software company in this space. But and I think, you know, that was around when there was a carbon tax being introduced. I'm a long way behind on understanding legislatively what's going on in Australia. But what are I suppose the pros and the cons of government? Are they supportive? Is there grants? Is there tax breaks? You know, when you're progressing in the right direction with this stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so the political lever in Australia gets pulled quite a lot around climate, and definitely yes, it would have been 2012, maybe 2014 when. Not Kevin Rudd came in, I think, just after Julie Gillard, but like it was Julie Gillard era who brought in the carbon price, and that was a big game changer for Australia. We were a market leader, and again, just recently, obviously that got dismantled, which was, you know, it is what it is when you've got that's used as a political tool, as it is in a lot of you know, countries and regulation. The political lever's been pulled here again, like we're in a probably more pragmatic way. I think it's more through that investor lens of understanding like what are a business's commercial financial risks from climate change. So understanding what a business is doing to assess the risk and to mitigate that risk as a business. So what governance do you have in place as your business? What kind of particular strategy do you have around your roadmap to decarbonise your business so you're in line with the Australian government targets? To what's your contribution going to be to that? And also more and more companies are looking at from an investor lens or a credit risk perspective or even an insurance kind of point of view, right? If you're exposed as a business from climate risk, and whether that is material or not to your business now, it could be in the future. So how are you future-proofing your business? And insurers really want to understand what are the core risks that you're taking, or core steps, that you're taking to understand the risks, if they're financially material or not. And then what does that mean for your business moving forward to ensure that you have the right governance and risk management approach in place to mitigate that risk from impacting your business. And that expands not just to your operations, right? That's your whole value chain. So understanding that as a business, I think it gives businesses actually a greater lens, right, to look at their entire business operations and go, what are the non-financial risks that are going to have a big impact on my business and on my bottom line? Companies have never thought that way before in the past, right? And the fact that it's now legislation in Australia and you have to report on that, and in Europe, so through the CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Disclosures in Europe. So those two levers that are happening not only at the kind of European global market level, but also at a local level in Australia, those two drivers are pushing a lot of change and forcing companies' hands essentially to actually make this a core part of their business, and then and understand how they're embedding that through their business strategy, and wanting to understand and monetize what the risk of that is. You know, it's the legislation itself is probably the one that's made the most sense, I think, in the last kind of 10 years. But companies are struggling with it because they don't have in-house professionals, they don't have that expertise. So you've seen this kind of balance come out of it, of push-pull of consultants sort of happening. And people trying to leverage expertise, but sometimes there's always a gap, right, and a lag between that, particularly when we start to talk about what's known as scope 3. So that's what's outside of your business operational control. And as you start to look at that and measure that, that's when you realize as a business just how exposed you can become, not only to climate change, but to supply chain risk. So, big impact with kind of the government levers that are happening in Australia at the moment and how companies are navigating that. There's a lot of companies that are pushing back because, it's quite a firm line of legislation. It's actually built into the Corporations Act, so it impacts all businesses.
I was about to say. I was about to ask that question. Yeah, is it listed company or it goes right the way down? Is there a cap?
No? So there's different groups. They've grouped from group 1 down through to group 3. And it's based on it's very similar actually to another legislation we have in Australia called the Modern Slavery Act. So it's based on your revenue, your number of employees, and whether or not you operate as a corporation in Australia. Yep. So if you meet those kind of trigger reporting requirements, then you fall into that need to annually report. And that's the same with the climate. It's actually mirrored off the International Sustainability Standards Board, S1 and S2, so Standard 1 and Standard 2. Standard 2 is what we're reporting to under the legislation, which is all around how your business manages climate risk and what is the financial impact to your business as part of that. So it's disclosing that in your 4 areas of your business. So your financial statements, your director's report, your sustainability report, and any other disclosures that you do as also your company secretary report or etc. So you've got 4 kind of key areas that a business is supposed to be disclosing that. Group 1, which is CSR, we fall into group 1. It's any company that earns over $100 million in revenue, has over 1,000 plus or 5,000 plus employees, and who also trigger the requirement for what's known as the NGERS reporting here in Australia. It's another legislation, which is the National Greenhouse Energy and Emissions Reporting Scheme. And so if you trigger that reporting requirement plus those other 2, then you are in group 1, essentially. And then it kind of tiers down to group 2 from there. And then small to medium enterprises kind of fall in your group 3.
Okay.
I think the thing that's making the Australian market the panic the most is the word I would probably use. It's a little bit of panic. Is that not only do you have to report, but it's mandatory to get verification and assurance of your data. Yep. So not just your scope 1 and 2, but also your governance, your metrics, and your targets. So your strategy, governance, metrics has a limited assurance, which is essentially a auditor like your Deloittes or your EYs that are coming into your business and want to understand what you've done to assess your climate risk, what governance approach you have in it to manage that through the different levels of your business right up to the board or executive. And then what is your metrics and targets and your strategy to achieve that? And then the next layer that I think is people are panicking about is scope 3.
Yeah, right, because it's much trickier. Well, I mean, it's
trickier.
Yeah, definitely trickier. Interesting. Anyway, I have more questions. I think probably I'll put it aside because almost we could go down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but it's interesting. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I was there 15 years ago and the stuff I was doing was all involved with CDP and GRI, all the data that you got through there. But it's kind of come a long way since then. But I actually want to ask some different stuff as well. You mentioned embodied carbon before, and I definitely want to make sure we talk about that. Perhaps before we talk about it, it's a word that people, even people not in the industry would hear, but it's a phrase that a lot of people wouldn't understand. Maybe just from your perspective, can you just describe what is embodied carbon? It's used a lot, but and by different audiences. Maybe explain what embodied carbon is and why it's such a critical part of the building's total carbon footprint, essentially.
Yeah, well, essentially what it comes down to is the amount of emissions or energy that it takes to produce that product. So to lower the embodied carbon of a product, you have to essentially change your operations or fuel switch to be able to lower that. So every business, like every manufacturer, who, at our level particularly, who needs to report, needs to demonstrate how you're doing that, whether that's on a per product basis or at that operational level. But essentially, it's how much fuel, how much gas, how much energy, electricity goes into producing that product.
Yep.
So from your operational perspective, and it also takes into consideration your full life cycle of your product. So not only just what we do to manufacture the product when it hits from a raw materials point into the beginning of our production line right through to the end of the production line, but also the extraction of those materials from whether that's through mining or whatever that might be, or however you get that material, all the way through to the end of life of that. So it's that when they talk about embodied carbon, they're looking at that in complete life cycle of that product. And that's where that becomes not only challenging for smaller companies, because to do that assessment is time consuming, resource consuming, but also costly, because portions of that are outside of your business control. So it's how do you measure the downstream of your business, so the extraction component, versus the upstream of, disposal, essentially, and even, disassembling of that product. So that's what that means whenever anyone talks about embodied carbon, it's the entire process that goes into making that product, not just what happens at the manufacturer's hand. Yeah.
So in terms of data and measurement of this, I mean, this sounds like a complex cobweb of probably, people, process, software. Can you give us a real life example, or is that too difficult? I'm really interested to think about just the whole.
No, absolutely. So I think, you can actually find for a number of products, one of the things that consumers can do is they can search for an EPD. So that's the Environmental Product Declaration, and the information that is publicly available of those EPDs comes from a business doing a life cycle assessment of that product. And so what you would look at through each of those life cycle stages is you would say, okay, how much energy, electricity or gas, or how much emissions will it take to do this component, this extraction of this raw material that's needed, or raw materials that is needed to go into that. And you have to assess that based on either known data, which is challenging if it's quite far down in your supply chain and you don't have direct control of that. So a lot of the time, particularly what we did, is we would either go to the supplier and ask if they had any measurement of their information, which typically they don't. And then it becomes down to a methodology that's applied. So typically we follow there's an ISO standard around life cycle assessments, and that creates then a standardized methodology of estimation across the sort of life cycle component. And obviously, what is very key when companies are doing things like an EPD is being very transparent and disclosing that methodology. And that's why EPDs in themselves, you can't actually have an EPD without going through the International EPD of Australasia. It's a certification and a verification process. So it's not like I can just go, I've done a life cycle assessment and here's my EPD, just believe what I'm saying. You actually have to go through a certification process where that data, every kind of stage of that life cycle and that data is needed to be verified and checked, which is great because it creates then a level of confidence around that information. And whilst that EPD gives companies that level of information, it doesn't actually give them a green ticket to go and do whatever they want. It's basically just telling me a little bit like when you go to the gym and you are there and you're like, I want to lose weight. I want to be the best person I've ever been. I want to be strong. I want to be fit. And the trainer goes, okay, stand on the scales and let me measure you. And you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's really uncomfortable and awkward. But if you don't do that, you don't know when you actually succeed, right? When you get to your goal weight or whatever. The EPD and the LCA is your baseline. It's like your line in the sand of what you've done, and it gives you an idea of where you may be able to decarbonize. So where are the core focus areas that have the biggest kind of material emissions for your product. So it gives you an idea of where you can focus rather than doing a needle in a haystack. It also allows a company to be able to go, okay, well, we know that for this year we can achieve and tackle this part of our operations or this part of our supply chain. So we can look for an alternative supplier that provides us with recycled materials as opposed to virgin materials, because that costs us a lot in terms of our emissions. So it's really good for that. But I think a lot of people, particularly like consumers, they don't understand. They think that an EPD is that, that company must be sustainable.
Yeah,
but
right,
it's actually just that line in the sand to say, this is where I am as a business. And it can tell a really good story, or it can also tell not a great story, right? It can say, well, compared to other products of this type in the market, you're actually performing 4 times less efficient than it is to make this product.
Yeah, right.
So if you're then an educated client or customer of our products, and they're comparing those two analysis and they cost the same, the products cost the same, they're going to pick the one that has, the less impact for them on the long term. So that's what's starting to happen in the market at the moment. It's this kind of push-pull around that. So it's very it's a very important tool. It's not what I would call it's not a greenwashing certificate, which I think some people think that you pay for this money and then, okay, great, now I can hold this up and go, look how green I am. It's not the case. So I think it's one of the better tools that I've seen in the market, but they are costly to do, because to do a life cycle assessment and to get all of that data, to speak to your suppliers, to pull all that together and calculate that methodology to that standard, and then get it verified, I think can cost a company, I've done, this is not giving anything away, but it can cost a company up to about $450,000
Yeah, right.
just to certify their suite of products, because you've got to do that life cycle analysis, the certification, and then the publication of that as well. So yeah, it's a big process, but it's one that I think is important from a disclosure point of view. And I think that kind of will become a lot more of the norm, not just for building products, but for other kind of, you see EPDs a little bit happening in some other kind of areas and industries, like retailers or food as well, is kind of like another kind of core one, because emission space at the end of food is probably the largest one. But I think it's important particularly to have some kind of benchmark to allow consumers to understand, well, what does this mean? And what does this mean for my home if I'm going to put this product in there?
I know we chatted before the pod. I was talking to you a little bit about, the stuff we've been involved with indirectly in terms of biochar in concrete as a replacement for cement. I'm no expert on it, but we've had some exposure. I just set that up to ask the question, I suppose, do you have any examples of innovation in terms of low carbon materials, circular initiatives, things that you're seeing in relation to what we're just talking about then, stuff that is interesting?
So in terms of, you will see marketed a lot low carbon concrete. And what that actually is made up of is it's a combination of raw materials, but mainly fly ash and soda ash are the 2 core components that help to make lower embodied carbon, because when you set that as a concrete, it dries faster and quicker, so it doesn't need as much intensive energy. So that's why you're able to say that the intensive to actually get those raw materials, the embodied carbon, is a lot lower to create the concrete. So the problem though with what's come out in the market is because everybody has got onto this low carbon concrete kind of bandwagon, is one word to call it, mainly because, right, if you think about all the materials that go into a building, the heaviest and the biggest, like steel, timber and concrete, that's where your biggest embodied carbon is going to be, because they're quite energy intensive to make. So when you have a low embodied carbon, it does reduce that overall embodied carbon of that entire building. But what that's meant is, because it has become quite a popular product, the there's a limited amount of resource around fly ash and soda ash. It's actually a byproduct from mining companies. So it's a waste material. So that's again why it's a really good resource, because you're using it from another industry to reduce carbon within cement so that you're creating this. But in Australia, the more that mining companies shut down and mining plants shut down, the less availability of this particular raw material there is, which means the cost ratio goes up. So it costs more money to make that low carbon. One of the innovations that they're actually looking at, I was at a conference this year, and Boral's been doing a lot of work. So Boral's an Australian cement company.
Yep.
They've been doing a lot of work in this space because they know how marketable and how wanted their low carbon concrete is. So they've been looking for alternatives for fly ash and soda ash. And part of that is looking at what's known as calcined clay. So it's clay as a raw material, and then you use what's known as a calcining technology, which helps to refine the clay even more, so that when you fire the clay or you use it within a product, it actually burns hotter and faster, a lot quicker, using a lot less energy intensive than kind of it would, similar to the fly ash and soda ash. So it's a good replacement. The issue that they hit, I think, in Boral is that it was because clay is like a reddy colour and cement's like your kind of pale grey.
Yeah.
They had to fix the colour issue.
Okay.
But other than that, I think that's going into trials now, and it's actually one that, I think businesses like even brick manufacturers like us could start to look at. It would lower the embodied carbon of bricks as well. So it's something that I think is readily available technology, readily available raw material that's not too hard to extract. It then creates another kind of leverage for, concrete. So it's that's kind of the flip side, and the challenge, I think, of low embodied carbon products is people think, it's just, all you got to do is just lower your energy intensive. But actually what you need to do is find an alternative that is faster and quicker to set or to uses less energy intensive. And finding an alternative is challenging, right? It's not an easy thing either. So these are some of the kind of real life examples of barriers that manufacturers or even building building and construction industry face, like trying to decarbonize our buildings in Australia.
And it has to be, and of course, has to be cost effective as well. So,
yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I think Mirvac, so Sarah Clark, who used to be sort of the GM of sustainability at Mirvac in Australia, which is one of the biggest kind of construction and building management companies in Australia. One of their case studies was that they were very proud to sort of state is that they were able to purchase low embodied carbon concrete for the same price as a normal concrete. And they said, and that allowed us to obviously, to decarbonize their building and not have to pay like a premium to do that. And that then sets the bar, right? It means that companies aren't willing to pay more for these products and for lowering their embodied carbon. If anything, they were like, well, you're taking less energy to make this, so then why should I be paying more? It's not necessarily seen or viewed as a premium. So that's the other flip side, is it's not something that you can go as a building products manufacturer and be like, well, we're going to do this because it's going to make us more money. It's actually not. It's going to save us money from an operational cost, but we're only going to be able to sell it at the same cost price that we already are. So that's the other sort of challenge of the business. But yeah.
Makes sense. Look, as we draw to a close, maybe just to talk about the future. You've been in the industry a long time, as you stated at the beginning. I mean, when you look forward, I don't know, 5-10 years, what are the things that you're optimistic about? Maybe other things you're more cautious about. The world is an interesting place. Australia has its own policies and politics and dynamics. Yeah. What are the things as you look ahead over the next 10 years? Where do you see this sector going? Things you're, like I say, optimistic, maybe things you're less optimistic or more cautious about?
I think, look, I'm definitely optimistic about the future. I always have to be in my type of role. But I think in terms of the differentiators, that the companies that we'll see that will become the most successful in the future are those that really are able to leverage circular economy thinking. So how do we create, particularly in the Australian market, right? It's not really a big market for that, but how do you, if you are a company that can leverage more of a circular economy or even a closed loop business model, that is going to be the differentiator in the next 5 to 10 years. And on top of that, if you are then able to leverage decarbonisation or how you manage your operational, like natural gas, energy consumption, and your emissions profile. So if you partner those two together, that is going to become the top tier, most successful companies in the next 5 to 10 years. Because not only is that going to save them from operational risk and exposure to supply chains that are currently, if you think about any supply chain, value chain across the world, they're very complicated. There's a lot of different players. There's a lot of risk there, right? And a lot of there's been no design of supply chains. So for any company, there's a lot of risk. So if you can leverage those two areas, circular economy, closed loop, partnerships, and those kind of climate resilience or that risk assessment and decarbonisation, that will position you really strongly to manage your business and to see solid returns that a company can feel confident in achieving and not having that outsourced non-financial risk exposure. Particularly as sort of the world becomes smaller, I think we're going to see more focus on that. There's also going to be more of a political drive and more of a carrot and a stick, essentially, that's going to come down to that sort of next layer. We're seeing that in manufacturers, right? If you were speaking to me 5 years ago, no one was even thinking about how products are manufactured. They were more thinking about how buildings are built and where the biggest emitters are. So that makes me hopeful. Those two kind of key areas is like if a company can successfully do that, they will be viewed as leaders, because not only will it impact their bottom line, will they see benefit from those efficiencies, it'll also create less risk for them as a business. And that's what businesses are about these days. They want longevity, they want returns, and they want low risk. And those two core levers are very big on creating that value chain for you as a company, right? So that I see is the differentiator. The thing that makes me hopeful is that we've got this now focus on nature as well, right? So not only are we talking just about circular economy and how we kind of reduce waste, and we talk more about sharing resources, but what does that mean from an ecosystem and a circular impact on nature? Because, it hasn't really been thought of before in the last 20 years in this space. And little Laura started out as a Bachelor of Science in Biodiversity and Conservation, never thought that big corporations like the one that I work for today would be going, okay, we need to understand what our nature risk is, because it makes such big sense. So I think that's what makes me hopeful. Those companies that are able to leverage that and nature. I think that's such a cool impact.
That's where we work in nature. So yeah, certainly good to hear that and agree. It's good to hear corporations talk. I mean, I'm seeing the whole push in biodiversity focus and so yeah. Look, great. I didn't have any more questions unless there was anything else I didn't ask that you'd like to share, but also please share where people can get in touch, learn more about the work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's been great chatting to you today, Matt. Really appreciate it. I don't think there's anything else to share at this stage other than, if you are somebody who is passionate at working in this space, jobs and roles like this exist, and companies are only going to be getting, more kind of resources in this space, but not just like standalone experts like myself. I think it'll be embedded into everybody's role across a company, right? Everybody will play a part. And so, this is something that if you're out there and going, what can I do to create an impact, become that soldier inside the company so you can help to join essentially a better outcome for not only us as a community, but the planet. So
cool. Great, Laura. Look, thanks a lot. great. I leave it whatever details you'd like in the speaker notes, so anyone watching or listening can scroll down and check out your organisation and yourself. But otherwise, look, thanks for joining. It was great, and I wish you all the best, and we can always do this again sometime.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Matt. It's been great.
Cool.